Welcome to This Explainer. Today we're exploring how a high-stakes, 53-minute military operation, roughly 4,000 kilometers away, completely redefined international counterterrorism and genuinely reshaped Israeli political leadership for decades to come. So how does a single 53-minute raid shift the trajectory of an entire nation's political future? Well, let's dive into this by looking through the lens of a political historian to really unpack the geopolitical ripples of the 1976 Entebbe hostage crisis. We often look at military operations purely in terms of tactical wins or losses. It's pretty rare that we see a single lightning-fast raid act as a direct catalyst for shifting the political power of a nation for half a century. To understand how that happened, we actually have to go back to a routine morning in the summer of 1976.
Section 1. The Entebbe hostage crisis.
This whole crisis kicks off with a really unprecedented ideological alliance that turned a standard commercial flight into a massive international standoff. On June 27th, Air France Flight 139 takes off from Tel Aviv with over 246 passengers. Then there's a routine stop in Athens. And this is where four individuals basically bypassed incredibly weak airport security. The metal detectors weren't even working. And they board the plane with guns and grenades hidden right in their bags. Within minutes of taking off for Paris, they storm the cockpit, divert the flight to Benghazi, Libya, for a bizarrely calm refueling stop, and then finally force a landing at Entebbe, Uganda. Tracing this hijacked plane's 4,000-kilometer path really visually grounds the sheer geographic scale of this unfolding geopolitical nightmare.
Now, to really impartially understand this, we have to look at their motives. This unusual coalition hijacked the plane to free 53 specific prisoners globally. Basically, two of the hijackers were from the PFLP, a militant group involved in the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, and the other two were from German revolutionary cells who were protesting Western coercion. They actually united their causes, eventually landing in Uganda under the watchful eye of its unpredictable leader, Idi Amin. The hijackers then issued a brutal ultimatum: release 53 specific prisoners, 40 of whom were held in Israel, and pay $5 million by July 1st, or the hostages would be killed.
Section 2. Israel's diplomatic dilemma. So the hijackers set a ticking clock for July 1st, threatening the hostages' lives. You can imagine the intense political friction building up inside Israel. Their initial reaction was frantic diplomacy. They utilized every single back channel available. They reached out to the US and Egypt to mediate. They even contacted PLO chairman Yasser Arafat, who did try to intervene, but the hijackers flatly refused to talk to him. And in a particularly fascinating diplomatic move, Israel had an old friend of Idi Amin's, a retired Israeli officer named Baruch Burka, call him directly. Get this, he even dangled the absolutely surreal prospect of a Nobel Peace Prize if Amin could just secure the hostages' release. But honestly, these efforts completely stalled. Amin just claimed his hands were tied. In this setup brilliantly illustrates the absolute agonizing political divide at the highest levels of the Israeli government, right as public pressure from desperate families was mounting. On one side, you had Prime Minister Yitzhak Rabin. He was feeling the immense pressure of families protesting outside government buildings, and he argued for accepting the demands just to save civilian lives trapped thousands of miles away in hostile territory. On the other side, Defense Minister Shimon Peres absolutely refused to release the prisoners. He argued that giving in would project global weakness and practically invite more attacks in the future. The tension in that war room must have been palpable.
Section 3. The 4,000-kilometer military strategy.
Okay, so the deadline gets extended to July 4th, partially because Idi Amin needed to travel to Mauritius and wanted a bit more time. At this point, the Israeli cabinet secretly pivots from stalled diplomacy to planning the logistically impossible. The crucial thing to note is that early military drafts were completely rejected because they relied on Ugandan cooperation, or they just ignored crazy hazards like Lake Victoria's massive crocodiles. They pitched a naval assault, a paratrooper drop, even a Trojan horse-style entry using a civilian plane. All scrapped. Why? Because the extraction plans were unreliable or depended entirely on Idi Amin playing nice afterwards. And that led them to a much bolder final strategy, sending over 100 commandos to take over the entire enemy airfield using sheer force and pure speed. The planners were facing a staggering logistical nightmare. Think about it. Projecting heavy military force 4,000 kilometers across Africa without detection and without any allied support on the ground. They chose 4 heavy-lift C-130 Hercules planes because they could carry large vehicles and handle rough, short runways. They had to fly incredibly low over the Red Sea, Ethiopia, and Lake Victoria just to stay entirely under the radar. Plus, a C-130 simply couldn't make an 8,000-kilometer round trip without stopping, so they had to secretly secure refueling permission from neighboring Kenya. Now, what's literally mind-blowing here is the intelligence Israel leveraged. It turns out the old terminal in Uganda where the hostages were being held, it was actually built by an Israeli construction company called Soli Bone back in the 1960s. So Israel got the exact blueprints, every inch, every corridor, and built a physical model to practice on. To guarantee the element of surprise, they designed a brilliant ground approach. They rolled a fake black Mercedes and Land Rovers straight out of the cargo hold to perfectly mimic Idi Amin's personal presidential convoy.
Section 4. Lightning Speed. Operation Thunderbolt.
All right, so it's the night of July 3rd, and we see how this high-stakes strategy finally meets reality on the tarmac of Entebbe. The lead C-130 lands in pitch black. Engines off, lights off. The fake presidential convoy rolls out smoothly, driving exactly 40 kilometers per hour because that was Amin's usual speed. But there was this tiny missing piece of intelligence. Idi Amin had purchased a white Mercedes just a couple of days prior. That one detail raised the immediate suspicions of the Ugandan guards on the tarmac, and they stopped the convoy just 300 meters from the terminal. This forced the Sayeret Makal commandos to engage prematurely. One commando fired with a silenced weapon, but another fired unsuppressed. That single gunshot shattered the silence of their approach and instantly alerted the entire airfield. But despite that early gunfire, the commandos held on to their most vital weapon, and that was pure speed. They spent exactly 53 minutes on the ground. The assault itself on the terminal took just about 30 minutes. The commandos stormed the building, shouting "Stay down" in both English and Hebrew. So in under an hour, the operation achieved its tactical goal, but obviously at a tragic cost. 102 hostages were rescued and boarded onto the awaiting planes. Tragically, 3 hostages were killed in the crossfire, and one, Dora Bloch, who had been moved to a local hospital previously, was later murdered in retaliation. All 7 hijackers were killed. Furthermore, 45 Ugandan soldiers died, and the Israelis destroyed 11 Ugandan MiG fighter jets on their way out to prevent any sort of airborne pursuit. But for Israel, the heaviest emotional blow was the loss of casualties on all sides, specifically including their assault team leader who was shot while leading that initial charge right into the terminal.
Section 5. The Geopolitical Aftermath.
To really unpack this event as a political historian, we have to look at the permanent, decades-long ripple effect triggered by that single commando fatality. The loss of the assault team leader, Yoni Netanyahu, sent massive shockwaves through the nation. He was the only Israeli commando to lose his life that night, and the country instantly elevated him to the status of a profound national hero. The military actually went ahead and officially renamed the entire mission from Operation Thunderbolt to Operation Yonatan in his honor, permanently embedding his name into the mythology of Israeli resilience and counter-terrorism.
And right here is where the tactical becomes deeply political. This huge wave of national sympathy fundamentally altered Israeli politics. It essentially served as the immediate and enduring catalyst that propelled the Netanyahu family into the political stratosphere. The heroic narrative surrounding Yoni's sacrifice paved the exact way for his younger brother, Benjamin Netanyahu, to step into the public eye. It allowed him to build a deeply security-focused political platform and ultimately become the longest-serving prime minister in Israel's history.
It leaves us with such a fascinating historical reality to ponder, right? How the split-second decisions of an audacious rescue mission 4,000 kilometers away continue to shape global geopolitics to this very day. The debate between Prime Minister Rabin and Defense Minister Peres literally laid the groundwork for modern state responses to terrorism, while the tragic death of Yoni Netanyahu gave rise to an entire political dynasty. It's a really striking reminder that history isn't just about the military operations themselves, but the immense, sweeping shadows they cast long after the planes have landed. So, what do you think is the biggest lesson modern leaders should take from Entebbe? Keep exploring, and I'll catch you in our next explainer.